Hey, welcome back to Behind the Barricade. I'm Jim Christian. This is the last one in this little series we've been running instead of guest interviews. We've been stepping back and pulling on the threads that kept showing up across our first 12 episodes. And Chad Cannon, who I've known for 10 years and who has helped build this whole show, has been the one turning the tables and interviewing me. Today's thread might be the most important of all of them, communication. And I'll warn you up front, I get on a bit of a soapbox. We get into why sending the email is not the same thing as communicating, why there's no good news and no bad news on a project. There's just news, and the sooner you share it, the better. And why saying yes when it should have been a no isn't the kind thing to do. It isn't even the courageous thing. If you've ever hidden behind a busy inbox and called it progress, this one's for you. Now on to the episode.
Hello, Chad Cannon here again, as I get to, over the last couple weeks, be here with Jim on the Behind the Barricade podcast. And as I've touched on the last couple episodes, we decided to take a break from interviewing guests and give me the chance to interview Jim and look back at these first 12 episodes and say, hey, what are these themes that are coming out? And this week we get to talk about a theme that I think is so crucial to the success of construction performance management. If this isn't there, the performance, ultimately seeing this project, on brand, on budget, on time, is not only highly unlikely, it's impossible. Looking back and reflecting on these episodes, this was so key. And it's communication, this idea of clarity, frequency, and courageous honesty. Those three things, if we can have those, then communication can thrive, communication can lead progress forward, and communication can ultimately be a strength to seeing the project through. When I say communication, and thinking, especially in the light of the business and the work that you do, what comes to mind, Jim?
What comes to mind and what's reality could be different things.
Yeah.
I think sometimes in the world that we're in right now, people can think that I've sent the email is communicating. I think I sent the text is communicating, which is true, but it's also not true. We kind of live into this idea that if an email has to go back a second time, that doesn't happen. We need to pick up the phone and have a conversation or have real live communication, whether that's on phone, video, on site. Email wasn't designed for communicating. It was designed to transfer information. And I think when we think of these four words, clarity, frequency, courageous, and honesty, I think it's too easy for us to hide behind those kind of things. Oh, I sent the email. I sent the minutes. I sent whatever those lines are. There is no courage in any of that. There is no clarity in any of that. Like, it really is, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to communicate in the way that the people that you're communicating with want to be communicated with as well, right? So the adaptability to, okay, this guy likes text, then a phone call. This person likes an email to follow up whatever those rules are, and it's different in different relationships. I often said this more than once to some people on our team and in our circles, like, can you imagine if the device could be made that you could push like 7 or 10 numbers on it and you could actually hear the person on the other end? Wouldn't that be phenomenal that technology could be so cool that you could actually have a phone call with no cables? So anyways, I think we forget that sometimes in communication, that there's different ways of doing it. You got to adapt to the structure or the style that the other people want, but we have to stretch the courage element. We have to stretch the clarity element and the honesty element through it. I don't know if that answered your question. Sorry about the soapbox.
No, I think it's good. No, that's great. I think it's just because you use words doesn't mean you communicated. You communicate it effectively, right? And at the end of the day, in this job, we want to communicate effectively to move things forward. Actually, just saw on Instagram the other day, a friend of mine was like, he posted a picture of his 3-year-old daughter with a telephone to her ear with a cord to the wall. And he said, one of the best things we did as a family was we actually installed this phone to the wall, and our kids are now calling their friends and actually having phone conversations. Not, granted, you can do that with a smartphone and things, but typically it's easier to not. And so just kind of going back to this like old way of communication. It's like we all have 7 and 10 numbers that we could pick up the phone and call people. And
Yeah.
I love that.
I think it just gets lost in it somehow, how easy it can be to do it and how easy it can be to forget about doing it.
Yeah. Something you just said there that hit me as like going to challenge me in how I communicate is if it requires me to send another email in response to their questions, I probably didn't communicate effectively enough, which means I need to pick up the phone. So, which then, okay, so like there, I think it's like two decisions there. It's like, okay, if that happens, I need to pick up the phone. But what can I do in the future that first communication doesn't require me after the email to pick up the phone? Because the reality is none of us have the time to do that, right? Which is why people don't do it, or we don't think we have the time, or we don't see that that's important enough to pick up the phone and do it. So that's a lesson that I just had is like, oh my, like when I'm communicating, whether it's email or text, how can I communicate differently that this ends our communication and we're both clear on what moves forward? And that the communication after that could be trust building, thanking, and not like, hey, more clarity, more questions, that type of thing. I think that's a big aha and takeaway that we saw through this podcast, but I just had this big aha, even challenge for my own self.
I'm so glad to hear that. That means I'm not going to get 2 emails in a row from you. Now I know.
This was
Now I know
this
I
whole
can just send
podcast
an
was
email
set up
back.
for that.
Now I know I can just send an email back and you're going to have to phone me. That's going to make my day.
Great. Here we go. This was just a facade to say, Chad, you suck at communicating. And so I'm going to now email you and we're going to have to talk more. No, that's great. So I think one of the things that you've also that came to bear in this podcast around this was more times than not, bad news happens on the job site or something happens on the job site that is going to require bad news to someone, whether it's all the way up, maybe it's downstream, maybe it's delays, maybe it's whatever. Talk about how you coach your team to deliver bad news and why it's so important to keep a project moving forward to do that well.
Pat Flood from Quarter 20, him and I had a client that was the same client. We worked on projects together with the same client. And this client had the perfect line. There's no good news. There's no bad news. There's just news. And the sooner I know, the better it is. And I think that's the key. It's the key. I haven't asked the client whether I can give him credit for it. So I'll just leave it that Pat and I have a familiar person there. But I think so often as project managers, we can let our ego get in the way, and anybody in the project can let their ego get in the way if they have bad news, or let's call it bad news, that they don't want to share it unless they have a solution. And I think that's where we can stumble, where if we don't have a solution, we don't want to deliver the news because we know the customer or the project partner is going to ask, what's the solution? So sometimes our ego will get in the way and we'll hold that news to try to find the solution. But that's the wrong approach, because if you're in a partnership relationship, delivering the news is the news. We don't know. Nobody knows the other things in the orbit on a project. It could be something going on with another project partner. It could be something going on in the owner's life. It should be something going on in the general contract. We just have to share this news, and collectively, we can solve the problem. Yeah, maybe we feel responsible for developing the solution, but we can get more minds on it, more thought put into it. That solution can bubble up. So, I really try to instill to our team, you share the news, and if you don't have the answer, just say, I don't have the answer, but we're working on it, and I'll get back to you in 4 hours, tomorrow morning, tomorrow night.
Totally.
Or this is a big problem. It may take me a week, whatever it is, as long as it's clear and you got to have some courage to deliver it. It's better than whoever finding out a week later that you knew this news for a week, haven't shared it.
Trying to solve it.
And you're trying to solve it, but they have a solution. How many times has it happened that we hold something back because our ego needs us to solve it, where a few more heads to it can solve the problem. Let's be more creative. Let's get outside the box and think about it. So I think that to me is how, we have a core value, eat frogs for breakfast. And really that is, we got to do the tough stuff. We got to get through it and share it and move it forward so that we don't sweep things under the carpet or we hold them too closely. We got to get it shared. We got to get it out, eat the frogs and move them along, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so good. I know I found myself guilty at times where probably if I don't have the solution, I don't feel like I should communicate. Or it's one thing to, if you don't have the solution, what I hear you saying is, but do you at least have an idea of a game plan to get to the solution? Because there's actually nothing more frustrating than delivering bad news and then expecting that other person to figure it out, right?
Absolutely. And that's not what I'm suggesting either.
Yeah, that's not what you're suggesting is like communicating the bad news. Even if you don't have the solution, you communicate the bad news in a way that you're going to try to get to those solutions. So you at least have a game plan. Like, I'm going to need 4 hours, or I think I need your input on these questions or these things for me to be able to better do it. Or I need to go talk to this person, but I wanted you to know before I do, because if I talk to this person, like, they're probably going to call you and they may be mad, like that's the worst thing that you can have happen. I remember it was one of my first weeks in the job in the book publishing world. And I took over. I had no book marketing experience whatsoever. And best sales job I ever did was getting this job as a VP of marketing at the largest book publisher here in Nashville. And I'm leading with our like A-list author. He's probably our second or third biggest author. We spent 7 figures on his book Advance. And we were on the conference call with 7 of his team. He wasn't on there, but there was 7 of his team members. And I could not disagree more with their whole plan to market the book. And it was like, if I gave you the details, you would know who I was talking about. But I mean, I felt like, to the point I looked at my team, I hit mute. I was like, am I being punked right now? Are they like, because they're like punking me because they know I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm like, I can't sign off on us spending money doing this. Are they like, am I crazy? And they're like, no. And I knew that within an hour, that author was going to call my boss. And so the moment we got out of that meeting, I went and called it to my boss's office and said, hey, this is what happened. I think I'm being punked, but you're going to get a call. If I'm not being punked, you're going to get a call. And I talk about trust, and we talked about this last episode, is that he said, I appreciate you letting me know, and I'm going to call you in when this guy calls. And so he brought me in when the guy, sure enough, was like, I think it was 35 minutes, called me in. And I mean, just berating my boss because this, and this. And he calmly just talked to the guy, talked him off the ledge and said, hey, I support and Chad on this. And I agree, and it's like, I mean, talk about trust building in that moment, because he could have very easily thrown me under the bus. He could have said, hey, and like we could have argued it out. And he de-escalated that guy, which, if you know that guy, the fact that you could de-escalate that guy is impressive. And so I think it just goes to show like the importance of that communication, like how different that would have been, a couple scenarios there, and tie this back to our work, because this happens every day. Something's going to happen. If I wouldn't have gone to my boss would have felt blindsided. He wouldn't have known any information. So he probably would have taken the side of the author. And then I would have been in the hot seat, vice versa. And so how much sideways energy? And the reality is like those situations probably happen every day on the job site in some capacity if communication isn't done well. It just goes to show that like when communication is done well, how it can keep things moving forward and build trust even faster, I think is really important.
Brené Brown has this line: daring leaders who live into their core values, never silent about hard things. Right? Like you just can't be. You have to have those conversations, and you got to share that news. And some people just aren't comfortable with it. Some people just don't want to be that vulnerable that they don't have the answer. And I think you build momentum, you build those relationships by showing your vulnerability. I'm not saying abdicate your responsibility, I'm not suggesting that. But you have to be able to show these are the moving parts here that I'm dealing with, how I'm working towards solving them. And
yeah, that's really good. So I think Rachel, in her conversation, I think a lot of us, this idea around just saying yes, to kind of keeping the peace, or saying yes because you want everyone to like you and to keep the project moving forward, but yet that it should have been a maybe or should have been a no. And that actually understanding, I think her thing was, yes is not a courageous position.
She was awesome.
It's not even kind, And so talk about that. Like, what are the things that you feel like there that I think are important?
Yeah, she was awesome making that point. Yeah, I think that's where business kind of gets in the way, right? Because we all are chasing a P&L at some level, right? However that works. And it's hard to say no. It's hard. I'm an entrepreneur. It kills me. I'll move any mountain to say yes. But as I've gotten older, there is power in no. There is power in saying, no, this isn't going to work, or no, I can't participate, because you're setting yourself up for failure, or however you want to say that. I think Michael Hyatt has his line, every no is a yes, right? So what are you saying to? But I think it does take courage to say no. does take courage to deliver that news, whatever that news may be, that's not going to want to be received. But if you have a relationship that's built on trust, if you have a relationship that's beyond everybody knows, everybody can accept what's going on. They might not like it. Maybe their initial reaction won't be kind and gentle or whatever. But the bottom line is, when you think of what is the goal is to get this project open. So what do we need to do to get to the finish line and be successful? So
Yeah. So moving this to kind of practicality, we talked about communication. We have so many ways to communicate, so many inputs. We've got this phone, which has a text message. We've got WhatsApp. We've got Voxer. We've got email. We've got all these different places to communicate. There's this constant email. I had to turn my, mute on, like, because I just started getting beeps in my ear from text messages popping up. So I'm like, what's this going to be about? So we all have this, and communication, I think even sometimes you get rewarded by always being available to communicate, and then you don't communicate so much potentially that you don't get any work done. So how do you balance this tension of like, hey, how do I manage all of these places that we could communicate with clients? And communication could actually make me look like I'm staying busy, but I'm actually not doing the most valuable things to drive project forward. Talk a little bit about that decision matrix around how to communicate, where to communicate, when to actually do the work.
it's a good thing we try to limit this podcast to 30 minutes, because this is, with the level of distraction we're all under right now, it's really hard to get work done and really advance something. And, Cal Newport and Deep Work really had some great information about the impact of distraction. So first of all, we have to own our distractions and eliminate as much as we can the distractions we have, so that we can do the work that allows for the communication to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as the communication is in rhythm with the expectations of the other party, then that is good. That's a good way to roll. And we know that there's levels of fire that need that communication depending on what's going on. But I think we can so easily get sucked into the immediate answer the text message, looking at the email constantly. All of this happens, and it completely derails getting the work done that needs to be done. So all that to say, I believe that we have more agency over our calendar than what we think. And I believe if we think about what we would want for communication, depending on the level of urgency, and work with our partners, clients, project partners, however that is, on how that's going to flow, then that's the best way. And find the rhythm that works for your different people, but also fit it into your framework that you need whatever block of time during the day, maybe it's different blocks of time, to be able to do the work that you need to do to advance the communication. So I don't know that I really answered your question, Chad, but I would say adaptability to the style that client wants is important, to try to get an understanding of how do they want to be communicated to. What's their frequency? We're dealing with a client now in Australia, so the time zones are freaky, right? We're going into 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. They're just getting up. What's that rhythm look like? How do we communicate with that? And in this case, we're doing WhatsApp a lot, but we got a regular rhythm in the calendar now that we're meeting rather than trying to do it ad hoc. So I think you got to figure it out from a client point of view or a partner point of view, but really ensure that you have agency over how you get distracted or not get distracted.
Totally.
I'm not sure if I answered the question there, but
no, that's really good. I think it's really practical. At the end of the day, what I hear you saying is you got to keep up with what your partner expects and what the client expects. And that is potentially the medium, like WhatsApp. If you're doing a lot with international and time, that's a place that people are using a lot more. And I think even Adam Hirsch was like, hey, that was a core value of theirs and they'd never done it. And it's a client that needed it. And so they had to learn it quickly. And so adaptability on that is super important.
And I think too, where this courage comes from is knowing that not to hide behind the busyness of I've sent these emails or I've done whatever, like getting the work done is the most important thing, because if we get the work done, the client, the partners will be happy.
Hmm.
Not happy that we've sent an email. They're happy that the
Totally.
project advanced, right? So that juggling act, if you want to call
Yeah. And then I think kind of this last point, this challenge of like, we talked about the communication, and sometimes we can communicate about things that are maybe not as high leverage, reports, this email chain, things of that nature. But also especially in your line of work, relationships are key, kind of the site conditions, real conversations around specific things that are happening, being on site, seeing things forward. How does that play into like, if you were to say, hey, how much of your time should be doing the work versus building the relationships versus if that person's job is to be on site, what does that mix kind of look like?
Yeah, I think Tim Patry on one of the first episodes had this idea that we need to spend 50% of our time, he called it, on the shop floor. And that shop floor is different depending on your role. If you're site superintendent, you got to be on the site outside of your trailer office or wherever you're working in the field. If you're project manager, again, 50% spending time in the field, walking the projects, talking to the superintendents, talking to the vendors, all that. And as you come up the chain, it's different. That shop floor is different, but I kind of feel that it's easy for us to hide behind the screen and not and smell the field. As an old colleague
Mm-hmm.
used to say, get out and smell the field, see what's cooking out there. So I don't know if 50, Tim's a wise guy, so maybe it's 50%. I just know that probably where you are, it's not enough. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
swinging it to being more where you need to be so you can see what's going on in real time and being able to communicate that out, I think is really the power of it. I think check your calendar, see if it's 50%. And if it is,
Mm-hmm.
okay. If it's not, figure out how you can do it differently. But I probably would spend more than that myself. But
As a bare minimum, yeah.
yeah, as a bare minimum, if you're not out with your people, out on your projects, with your clients, if that's your role, like if you're in a business development role, you got to be spending 50% of your time working with those
Mhm.
relationships. So it all depends on
Yep.
your role, but I think it's a good starting point.
Yep. Yeah. So as we kind of finish this episode around communication, I'd love to just hear summary from you, at Cornerstone, what's your expectation when it comes to communicating with clients? The idea of like, hey, relationships are super key to us. The ultimate, like, the project needs to be on brand, needs to be on time, it needs to be on budget. So, what is your team expectation? If I were to sit down and maybe not even ask you, but my team's expectation, if I were to say, hey, how would you know if you're communicating well based on what Jim and Cornerstone's expectations are with your clients? And if you're not, what are you going to do? If you are, how do you continue that path forward? I asked a couple questions there. So would take one of them and run with it.
Yeah, I think it comes down to those two of the core values. We eat our frog. So if you got some news that needs to be shared, share it. Share it quickly, find solutions as quick as you can, but know that not sharing it's not an option. Two would be just treat the person that needs to get the communication the way you'd want to be treated. If the shoes were reversed, how would you want to receive?
Mhm.
How quickly would you want to receive this news? And just live in those two worlds of how to do it. I don't know that we don't have any hard and fast rules that every email needs to be answered in 24 hours or anything like that. I think it's just do that. If you can do those two things, do what you say you're going to do when you said you're going to do it, or let them know if reasons are. I think those are just fundamentals. What you can't do with me is say, I've sent the email.
Yeah.
That doesn't go.
Yeah.
That
That'll
doesn't,
rile you up, huh?
if it's a problem and I get the answer, I've sent the email, that's a non-starter for me. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So anyways, I think all that to say, adapt to what your partners want, what your clients want, what your team members want. That's another thing.
Hmm.
We have
Yep.
teams
Yep.
that we're working with
Mm.
internally. Like what speed do they need it? And
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. Well, I think what I hear, a lot in this is that I think communication, this distraction is so high. There's so many different places. I think sometimes we don't take enough time to just stop and think about how we would want to be communicated with that would make it easier for us just to then go and communicate clearly via email, via text, or whatever. And I think it's just in this barrage, it's easy just to like say, I sent the email and it's on them now, right? But if we're going to communicate effectively with the goal of serving our clients the best, to build long-term relationships, to build partnerships, not just what I cornerstone, but I think as a whole, as an industry, if we're wanting to work together to drive great results and deliver really good projects on time, on brand, and on budget, communication is so key. And so I think this was a great episode. If you're listening to this, I would say, hey, what is your standard? What are some of those things? What are the things that rile you up? Like Jim, like I sent the emails, not going to work. Like that is just not it. But how can we make communication a priority that our clients feel like partners in how we communicate? I think that's what you're trying to say, is that if we communicate it the right way, it's going to build trust. It's going to keep the relationship moving forward, keep the project moving forward, and really keep the partnership versus a vendor. And communicating with the vendors different than communicating with a partner, and so having that partnership mindset in your communication is huge. So appreciate everyone listening in. This was super fun. I loved being with you, Jim, and thanks for all the wisdom that you shared, and excited to see what comes with the podcast and the upcoming guests.
I'm a bit concerned that we're going to get flooded with comments saying Chad's a much better interviewer than Jim, so get Jim off the pod and bring Chad in.
Don't worry, that's not going to happen. This is not going to happen.
Okay. See you next time, Chad.
See you, Jim.
So that's communication. And honestly, it might be the one that ties the whole series together. The line that keeps coming back to me was, there's no good news, there's no bad news, there's just news. And the sooner we share it, the better. We hold things back because our ego wants to show up with the solution already in hand. But in real partnerships, delivering the news is the job. Get more minds on it and the solution bubbles up. The second one challenged me personally. Sending the email is not communicating. Email was built to transfer information, not to actually connect. It's that simple. If a question comes back a second time, you don't need to communicate the first time. Pick up the phone. And the last one, get out and smell the field. Tim Patrick's 50% of their time should be on the shop floor. It's just easy to hide behind a screen and feel busy when the work you're actually moving a project forward is happening out where the people are. If this series has been useful to you, do me a quick favor. Leave us a review and a rating wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get the podcast. It genuinely matters. Reviews are how this show finds the next person who needs it. Somebody trying to lead a project well and communicate while it counts. A few words from you will help them find us. That wraps up our look back at these first 12 episodes. Next time, we'll be back with a guest in the chair with a new conversation and a new voice from the industry. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.